Welcome to the Two Stewards Show. When society declines morally, spiritually, and intellectually, one of the first things to go is the arts. And one of the arts that we have lost is the one called reading a book. For some reason, people no longer read books in a way that enriches the mind and soul. Perhaps that is because we have also lost the art of writing good books. Or perhaps we are too busy judging all the books by their covers, which lack luster, because we have also lost the art of painting good book cover art. What a deplorable situation to be in. How will the next generation know what is right and good and true? Will the next generation even be literate? How do we get back to reality? Today, we are talking with Joshua Emmanuel, founder of Jungle Ministry in Jos, Nigeria. He is a missionary, Christian apologist, podcaster, and book reader. What does the moral, spiritual, and intellectual revival of our society look like? What does it require? We talk docility, impotency, virility, and more. If you want to learn more about Joshua and the work he's doing, head over to teachthestory.org. You can find his podcast on YouTube. Just search The Reformation Room Podcast. Links are in the show notes. As always, this show is not financial advice, but is valuable for listening amusement purposes. And now, Joshua Emmanuel.
Hello, folks. Welcome back to the Two Stewards Show. We are here today with Joshua Emmanuel, and Joshua is a missionary who has spent a lot of time in Nigeria, and he's also in Texas. Been back and forth in Texas, originally Canadian. But welcome, Joshua. Glad to have you with us today.
Thanks, guys. A pleasure to be here, truly.
Yeah. So, I think there's a bit of a connection between Brent's wife and yourself, and she's followed along with your adventures, and we thought you would be a great guy to get on the show and just talk a little bit about number one, what's going on in Nigeria, so a little bit of global update, but then also economics, maybe some Bitcoin, apologetics. You're doing a lot of that. I've seen a few YouTube videos. So why don't you give us a quick introduction to Joshua? Who are you? How did you get where you are?
Sure. I appreciate that. Thanks for having me on, guys. It's a pleasure. Absolutely. I'll have to give Sharita the thanks for the introduction here properly, which I guess leads me back, like you said, originally Canadian, born and raised in the Niagara Peninsula, was there all my life until I was 18. To make it really short, grew up, of course, in a good Reformed home. We're the only non-Dutch family in a very large Dutch Reformed community. There was a few of us, but that always made you a little bit of the outlier. Grew up with that kind of on my shoulders. My father was, when I was growing up, he was quite involved in apologetics broadly and politics in Canada. A very academic environment in my youth. By the time I was probably around 12, 13 years old, I remember I started smoking cigarettes and started drinking, got into drugs and all kinds of stuff like that. When I was around 13 years old and into 14, I had a deep hatred for Christianity. Has to do with kind of my upbringing. It was so academic. I remember I'd have to come home from school, right? And I'm 6 years old and I have to memorize the Westminster Confession of Faith, the Catechism, after school, right? So you just had a private Bible education all day. Now you got to get home, you got to memorize catechisms. And this is before anyone else is even going into catechism class, years before it. I'm 6, for goodness sake. So I really grew up in that kind of environment. Then you got to sit at the dinner table and dad's practicing apologetics and you have to defend your faith as a 7, 8, 9-year-old. And I'll say this, I'm grateful for it now, but at the time I absolutely hated it. And so it gave me a really deep hatred for Christianity, so that by the time I got into high school a little more, that's just the way I went. Got into drugs, got into a lot of nefarious activity, some minor criminal activity as well. My life went that direction. It was when I was 17 years old. I was born again quite radically, just in one particular day, actually on my way home from that school. And I was getting high, actually, and God met me in that shed loudly and uncomfortably. When I tried to avoid him and run away as much as I could, he persisted. I often resonate with C.S. Lewis's his statement where he got on a bus one day and he came off the bus, and after he got off the bus, he finally was a Christian, but he had to come kicking and screaming. And that's what I felt. I became a Christian kicking and screaming. It was very clear to me God's sovereign choice in the matter, because I certainly was not searching for him and wanted nothing to do with him and nothing to do with the Christian community I was a part of. Of course, Brent's wife could tell us some good stories when I was in high school, just how much of a pain in the butt I was. But when I became a Christian, I had an overwhelming passion. All of my friends were, for the most part, they were criminals, they were drug addicts, they were just that sort. Most of them, of course, at that time weren't in that school. And so going back to them and very quickly saying, look, I can't be a part of this life, you lose all your friends very quickly. And it was through a lot of debate, constant debate back and forth. Like I said, I had been trained so much that when I became a Christian, I understood my Christianity from the lens of Proverbs 1, verse 7, the fear of God is the beginning of understanding. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. So I read, having these debates with all my friends, lose them all. And along the way, I developed this overwhelming passion, not just to defend my faith, but wanting to help my brothers in my generation defend their faith. That was just something the Lord laid on my heart really deeply. So I went and I did my first degree, actually not far from you guys, Redeemer University, focused on philosophy there and theology, with a minor kind of in economics, and then in political science. And then I went to McMaster and I did my master's in philosophy. And that was the catalyst for actually Nigeria, because I was there and I was studying so much of this philosophy in a very, very hostile environment where I am the only Christian, certainly evangelical. They think I'm a primitive relic because I'm actually standing on the inerrancy of Scripture and things like this. And this is in the early 2010s, right? This is where transgender ideology and such is. I mean, I remember the theses that my colleagues were writing, and it was really along those lines. And it was just so toxic, but I loved the teaching element. I liked the studying, but I loved the teaching. And I had the opportunity to teach some classes while I was doing my master's. It was one of the reasons I enjoyed the master's graduate program. And it was the teaching side that I enjoyed. The students took to it. I had an opportunity to actually evangelize students at McMaster in the philosophy department by approaching the philosophers through what we call a presuppositionalist worldview. And that really allowed me to evangelize some of them. But I knew I didn't want to always have to act like an assassin in the Western institutions where you have to kind of be undercover because they're going to fire you the moment they know, or they're going to get rid of your scholarship and all that kind of stuff. My best friend at the time, he was in Nigeria as I was finishing up, and it was a battle. Do you continue with the PhD or do you go over? And I just wanted to live my faith on my sleeve. And there was an opportunity at a Bible school in Nigeria. It was an American mission school to teach Old Testament, New Testament, church history, apologetics, world religions. Let's pray about it. Yes, let's go. I'm 23. This is a new adventure, a new world, unknown. Let's do it. So I went over there, was in that school for 1 year, enjoyed it, loved it. Two things that I really didn't like. One, I was inside the walls of the compound all the time. They really segregate missionaries over there. I mean, they've got liability concerns, but as a young man who certainly was unwed with no children, the last thing I want to be in a foreign world is just stuck under the wall. I want to experience this culture. I want to see this place. I want to know it. And the other thing was I was discouraged slightly, at least, by the very, very few Nigerians. In an American mission school in Nigeria, you're teaching the 1%, and it's not really missionaries' kids anymore. There's very few. You're teaching the 1% of very wealthy Nigerians who their children, they can afford to put their children in an American education type curriculum. And their money is largely derived from corruption already. And then these children, their whole entire goal is to get that education to escape to the UK, to Canada, or to the States and never come back. And you're in one of the most corrupt, impoverished, war-torn countries on planet Earth. You've been given this privilege. And that really bothered me. So I ended up leaving there and joining the mission field. And to kind of wrap it up here, that was just under 9 years ago now. I kind of looked around, there's endless needs in a place like Nigeria, endless. But the thing that I saw over and over, and even while I was teaching at that school, was I heard about these jungles. And I like to summarize the jungle as it's like a den of iniquity. It's a slum within a slum. It's the center of evil within the slums. And the students talked about it favorably, like when you're in a rebellious stage of life, it's cool to be around that. They'd never been there. They just got their drugs from that kind of place through their middlemen. And everywhere you go in Nigeria, you're going to see women, they got children on their backs, children on their fronts. They're working at the corner of the street with a little fire and a pot, and they're working and they're raising the children. And then you look around and you'll see men everywhere doing next to nothing. I'm not saying there's no men who work, but consistently you'll just see men, what we call in Nigeria, hustling. It's crime. It's how can I get the most amount of money for the least amount of work as quickly as possible, right? It's the Homer Simpson get rich quick scheme kind of thing. But with a lot of violence mixed in. And there was just something God convicted on my heart. I want you to reach these men. And I remember thinking, well, I have no idea what third world jungle living is like. I got no idea what street living is like. The only thing I do know, though, is what it's like to be what they call a bad boy. And so I started ministering to these men down in the jungles. It took a while to get anyone to show me them. They were kind of fearful, but we eventually got there. I'll never forget that first day, just being surrounded by over 300 big Nigerian thugs deep away from any security. Like, I'm going to die. What's the white boy doing down here? This is dumb. But they listened, and I just slowly over days and weeks started building relationships with them, where fast forward now, I'm the director of Jungle Ministry Nigeria. We have a center which houses 45 men. We have 20 different fellowships around the city. The recovery fellowships, where these men come, they begin their walk through addiction rehabilitation in a intimate fellowship with other men leading them. And then discipleship's a part of that. And then that led to the creation of a Bible college, because a lot of these men actually, they'd never been taught at all. And they had a thirst and a hunger to understand the Bible. You'll see churches all over Nigeria, but it's a very shallow gospel. It's a mile wide and inch deep, we say on the mission field. And it's mostly maybe prosperity or extreme versions of charismatic, really, really focused on the hellfire, the tongues, the miracles, and the power stuff. So that's where we decided to start a Bible college. And there's a few other things I do in Nigeria, but that's the broader story. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at present.
So when you say jungle, you don't mean the actual jungle with the trees and the snakes and you mean like inner city slum, like that's
think mentality, right? The jungle mentality. It's going to be inner cities, usually by a river. There will be the only couple trees you might find in the slums down by that river. Of course, that river is full of trash, just full, and that's of course where a lot of them still wash and even get their water. But that's where those men would congregate. They build shanty huts. They build little villages down there. And I just went and sat with them down there.
Wow. So what, from a security perspective, I mean, I guess, one thing is going in, being a foreigner in a strange city and going into the slums and talking to people. That's, I can't feel for you there. I wasn't going to put it that way.
He's still alive, man.
But I mean, where you are, or where the Bible college is, because we've heard a lot about and seen recently a lot of the talk about it's Boko Haram and other militant Islamic groups. Like, have you been? I don't know. Have you seen? Like, are you concerned about that? About these militant groups? Because I mean, they're real, and we only see the news from what gets out there, but like, what is the situation like on the ground? Because it seems terrible. It seems like civil war.
Yeah, largely is, and I'm going to have to try to be concise here, because we got to do another entire episode.
Yeah.
But when I first arrived there, I wasn't fully aware of it. You're in the city. You only hear about what happens occasionally in the city. You hear what happens outside. But again, they keep those, we're called expats, right, over there. They keep us in compounds. So most of the expats are only hearing about it from a distance. If the city gets put down into lockdown for some insecurity that's happening in the marketplace or just outside the city or anything like that, it's locked down. Missionaries, just generally expats, they're not going anywhere. They're not experiencing it. They're not coming into contact with it. That would have been my life if I remained on the compound. Working with redeemed thugs is generally what I call these men, much like myself. You see it up close. So after a couple of years of working with them, I I remember I returned to Nigeria one year after a brief 1 month kind of the tour updating and fundraising and all that. And it was tangibly different. I could tell that the situation had deteriorated exponentially. And I just had this deep conviction, and I'd be curious your thoughts, but there's a lot of missions and humanitarian activities engaged in helping people rebuild farms and rebuild houses and food and clothing and medicines and that. I'm not a pacifist. And I got to a point where I was simply like, God, we can keep helping these people, but they're getting slaughtered nonetheless. Can we do something more? And I, firm believer, Jesus said, to his disciples, understanding the times they were in, go out and buy a sword. So I started to actually work with my guys because they were all tapped into that world. And I got really exposed to what's going on there now and really in depth engaged in it through working with my guys to simply actually move some hard power and start training villagers. I just was overwhelmed with this conviction. I spoke to 1 or 2 missionaries who had been there very long and asked them what they thought. And they were like, do it and don't tell anybody about it. And be extremely careful. I'm only speaking about it now because I'm not in the country, and I believe I need to be more open about what's happening there. Because I started to do that and started working with these Nigerians and certain guys. We were going to certain areas, we were training, we were even moving certain hard power to those people to defend themselves. And what I can confidently tell you is the Nigerian government is 100% complicit. I know right now a lot of them they're working with the American government to take out certain camps, and they've done that recently. The Trump administration, of course, has actually gone into northwest Nigeria and bombed. But I can tell you that this particular persecution has really, really started since 9/11. There was stuff going on in Nigeria before that, but it was following 9/11 when Muslims got a lot of, especially the Islamists, got a lot of motivation. And ever since that point, and for a whole bunch of reasons that I want to limit myself, maybe another time, the certain groups that are attached to ISIS, the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, Nigeria was the focal point because it is a powerhouse in terms of population, its proximity to the West. It's just it used to have a caliphate as well. There's a lot of reasons Nigeria is quite strategic, and they've been hitting it very hard to get their caliphate back and to claim Nigeria back. And the gospel has been spreading so fast into the north. The gospel is spreading faster in Nigeria than almost anywhere else in the world. And as the gospel spreads into these areas that are predominantly, they're Muslim or traditional African religion, of course, that's brought a lot of anger, envy, bitterness to where, again, if you're a Christian, you convert, you're killed. So there's a lot of Christians we've worked with who are in hiding, right? There's centers set up for that. It's very real. It's very constant. It's far more than the average number you see on television. I get reports every day. At this point, my work is, I'm like a ghost. I try to remain largely unseen, but facilitating things and working with certain government officials who God has helped me through the years to sift, to know that they're genuinely Christian. And so we continue to facilitate trainings to help build a Christian, I don't want to call it a militia necessarily, but to really help these Christian villagers defend themselves and push back their invaders, because it's every day, Mark. It's every day there's a report of some killing. And it might just be 5 guys here in the bush, 6 guys over here. Then there's a village of 72. Then there's a village of 200. But we have to remember that in a country like Nigeria, a good portion of the population is undocumented. They don't exist, right? They're born in the village in the most primitive conditions, and they die before they're 30. They don't have a birth certificate. They have no record. The little clinic, which is a room made of mud bricks, has no record. And so people in Nigeria are, again, Nigeria is the most persecuted nation on earth, and the numbers would be a lot higher than you probably see. For me, it's not, I want to be careful, it's not generally unsafe. I've put myself in positions repeatedly doing this kind of work that has certainly made it, by all measurements, unsafe. But I'll tell you confidently, I've never felt that. I know I'm doing the work God has asked me to do when there's absolute peace doing it. So hopefully that fills it in. There's way more, but I'm trying to be concise. Not easy.
Yeah. We only have so much time.
Yeah.
Okay, that brings to mind a question, a more general question, I guess, and I usually do this. We get way off track,
That's how conversations go, isn't it?
Like, this is a very big question. I probably don't have enough time to answer the whole thing either. But, for years, the West has sent tons of aid to Africa because we can look at, the situation you've just described. Like, your heart just goes out to the people who are struggling like this. And so, the natural inclination is, I'm not going to go down there. Like, you might go down there. I'm not going to. So I'll
Sure.
send some money.
Yeah.
Like, how, number one, does the West have an obligation to make the lives of a whole continent? Because, I mean, when we just say Africa, right? We don't think of Nigeria specifically because we're in the West and it's just sort of an amorphous blob, right? Africa. And I'll send money to Africa. Well, what are African customs like? Like, where? Number one, do we have a moral obligation? I think, you can say we have an obligation to spread the gospel for sure, but to make life better, to intervene, right? So Trump has intervened, and a lot of people have been thankful for that. But when you have a country that, I don't know, doesn't seem like, from what you're describing, really wants to get better or change. And I mean, this is the situation in a lot of the third world, right? You've got the top 1%. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, because I've mixed feelings about who are we to go in there? Kind of like the white savior complex, right? We're going to go in and make everything better, and we make things worse. So I don't know if you have a solution in 50 words or less, but just based on because you've actually been on the ground, right? So I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
To be as concise as possible, no and stop. That's all put in 2 words. I'd look at it from a biblical perspective first, and I would look at how has God designed the world to function, and what are the institutions that God actually builds nations through, right? And when you look at the Bible, you're really broken down. There's 4 tiers, right? There's self-government, there's family government, church government, and then civil government. And the Bible actually fairly clearly articulates the responsibilities to each of those spheres, each of those tiers, each of those areas of life. And the prerogative of the state is not foreign aid. I never see anything close to that in Scripture. And in fact, when we see it in practice through history, in particular in Africa, I think you're dead on, Mark, it's become substantially worse. In fact, I know very immediately from experience as well, that foreign aid that comes from, say, the U.S. government or the Canadian government or the British government that is given to the Nigerian government or to the Nigerian NGOs, which are government affiliated, almost never, ever gets to the people. I mean, it lines their pockets. I remember when COVID happened and it was exposed in the city of Jos, where we're based, that there were massive warehouses full of foodstuffs and medicals, all kinds of aid that had been given from Western NGOs that was being hoarded in massive amounts by the people who brought it in. Nothing was being distributed. Nothing was being given, right? The local Nigerians ended up breaking in, and thousands of them mobbed these places and took it all away, and most likely just sell it, to be honest, to get something to get by. So when it comes to foreign aid, first of all, it's just a political policy. On the civil side, no, stop. I'm a very firm opponent of that for principled reasons, but then also pragmatic ones. When it comes to assisting our brothers and sisters as Christians, there's something a little different. But as we see throughout Scripture, I mean, just go to Acts when you look at the church. That's done voluntarily. That's done privately. That's done through peoples and the church. And we see that even in Western history, in the development of the West, right? The hospitals, and where real welfare help happen, orphanages and such, that was the development of the church and families alongside of it. There's a personal connection, right? Because when the state just does it from afar, there's no accountability, there's no responsibility, there's no connection. But when you and I know face to face, hey, Mark's going through something and we need to help Mark, right? There's a lot more that comes with it. Again, accountability, a personal relationship, an ability to walk by somebody. How we do ministry in Nigeria, right? I'm predominantly doing teaching and discipleship ministry. There's mercy components to that, right? But those mercy components we're not just throwing stuff out all the time. we're working with you, we're discipling you. Okay, we're at a certain, I think maybe to invest, teach them to fish rather than to just keep giving them fish. So that's just, I think that was pretty condensed for me, actually.
No, that was good. Yeah, that was concise. Sorry, Brent, did you have a question or?
Well, yeah, just interesting that you brought that up, Joshua. The kind of offloading of responsibility from this personal kind of one-on-one help that, if your boot's on the ground and you're faced with an individual right in front of you and you can see their needs and you can you can have some sort of accountability too. Like, I'm going to give you this and I'm going to show up tomorrow and I'm going to help you through this and I'm going to teach you how to fish. And then how we so often offload that responsibility to organizations or to government and whatnot, and the impacts you've seen that. And I don't want to steer this conversation in any way, but Bitcoin came up on the radar when we were looking at your Facebook account. And you mentioned earlier you're minoring in economics too. So has that played into your thinking at all?
Oh, completely. Oh, that's a fun one. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that question. And definitely on the mission field, I mean, macroeconomic theory is simply not studied in Africa. If you ask somebody, hey, they've said I got an economics degree, I'm like, oh, cool. Let's start talking about Keynes or Mises or Hayek or whoever. And what? What are you talking about? Like, there's no teaching in that sphere, and even a lot of so-called economists haven't really studied that theory. I've put it like this. I mean, the podcast, I like the name you guys have chosen here, Two Stewards. I'm a strong believer that, of course, when God created man, he puts him in the garden. The first command he gives man is to rule and be a steward, right? To have dominion, to exercise lordship. And then, the second part of exercising lordship is you manage it. Your husbandry is the technical term, which is to be a good steward. And when it comes to, for instance, when you're fundraising or when you're building something in anywhere, but definitely in the foreign world, a big part of my mindset has constantly been, how can I make these resources go as far as possible? And so when it came to just economic theory, years of studying and reading like the major macroeconomists and then paralleling it with scripture has led me towards what people might call a Christian libertarianism of sorts. Right, where it is the responsibility of the private individual and their families to steward those resources. Right, we are going to answer to God for that. Giving that responsibility over to the state is an abdication of our responsibility, and is in fact giving it to an institution that has not been designed by God to manage that or do that work at all, and will fail in it. Right, and I always say biblical libertarian because full libertarianism is going to lead you into anarchy and is going to lead you down a different path. But I often, of course, have looked at the government as the umpire, right? We're playing the game, whether it's football, hockey. We're Canadians. Hockey, good grief, right? When we're playing hockey here, the referee is supposed to be the state. They're not engaged in the game, but they are ensuring that people aren't actively taking advantage and harming one another. And so when it comes to resources and monies and such, when you see a place like Africa and you're bringing money in there and you're trying to build things in a place that doesn't have the kind of Protestant work ethic that the Western world does, doesn't have much of an understanding of property rights or capitalism, free market economics at all, and is kind of a functionally dysfunctional communism. Try to make sense of that, but and I don't know if communism is ever functional. It's not, but that's what you kind of have happening. It's a welfare state that doesn't do anything. But the government controls all the means of major production in Nigeria and a lot of those nations because it's dictatorship. So you bring, and then the way the mindset of most of the people, it's similar often in the West, but there it's really, really bad. The government has to do it. The government has to do it. The government has, the roads, everything is just horribly impoverished and no one's taking responsibility because they're just all sitting there often waiting for, the government, our Miangwa, our chief, things like that. And so as I've actively worked with men, because my work is primarily and almost exclusively with men by association with their families, but as I work with these men, one of the concepts I often begin teaching them as we're discipling them is money management, stewardship of resources. the importance of saving, tithing, and having a basic budget and a ledger for that. And then what money is and how we are to use it. And of course, I'm sure you two gentlemen know, having a conversation with people about what money is usually either really difficult because they've never asked the question. They use it every day, but they just think, oh, money's just a piece of paper. That's it. It's not, and you know that, right? What money is, and then what it's for, right? What's the purpose of that? And so and we can continue this, but I came to an understanding during COVID, and I wish I'd got there earlier. I think we were saying that the other day, Brent, right? I wish I'd gotten on the Bitcoin train earlier, like I'm sure many of us have said.
Yeah.
But it was in Africa. During COVID, I'm seeing what the Western governments are doing, particularly. I'm becoming a lot more concerned, with my own privacy, security. We're living in surveillance states, for goodness sake. And I'm not comfortable with any of that, especially as a Christian doing frontline Christian work. I know the powers that be have no interest in propagating what we do. So we have to be, as Jesus says, wise as serpents. I'll be gentle as dove to the sheep, but I got to be wise as a serpent to our very hostile overlords often. And so that someone had I was looking into different security things and whatnot, and someone just said, you need to look more into Bitcoin, because as we talked about economics and myself holding to more, and I think scripture is a much more of like an Austrian economic system. If you're familiar with Austrian economics, right? It promotes a free market system. I wanted a source of real money. And, we talk about property. And in Nigeria, they still use goats and chickens and all of that good stuff that we all still, but in a modern technocratic age, it's not possible. And so that's when I started looking into Bitcoin, and I was fascinated by it, especially as a means down the road, but even now, to help the undeveloped world develop without all these middlemen stealing it all, without all these governments hoarding it all, and just, stealing from the people, whether through inflation or the different forms of it, printing money ad nauseum. Bitcoin can protect not just me as a Christian, not just my family as a Christian, but it can really help the undeveloped world, I think, in particular.
Did you, Mark, you probably got a question. I was going to ask, did you live through the e-Naira debacle? But
yeah, I did.
the CBDC, right? The central bank currency that they launched. Were you on the ground for that too?
I was. That never went anywhere. They're still using cash. In fact, they're using the old cash still. They added new cash into the economy, or new fiat currency, and they're still using the old fiat. And so Nigeria, I don't know if you know this, but Nigeria, I think it was third largest, might still be in the world, of Bitcoin users. And several years ago, when the Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, really became aware of that, and I'll never still understand why the Nigerians did this. They went and banned Bitcoin, and they took it from everyone's accounts. And I still just don't understand why all these people were keeping their Bitcoin in central bank accounts. I'm like, doesn't that defeat the purpose of having something like this? So I know it's still very widely used. Crypto, there's a lot of the altcoins in the Nigerian marketplace. You'll see them being used there. Of course, they don't have much value beyond that. But yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, I just want to get back. You had mentioned different levels of governance and government, right? And you're working especially with men to more, assert their governance sort of on the family side, but on the civil side of things. So, Brent always has to remind me that not everybody knows what I'm thinking, or that just because we've talked about something once or twice, that not everybody either knows or agrees with it. But like, what is the function of government then? Because you're talking about having this, having Bitcoin, which the government can't control. Like, is that not one of the functions of government? Is to make money, to print money, and to distribute that. I can't even say it with a straight face. To redistribute that wealth as needed, and and kind of to marshal the economy. Like, what is your view? What should the government, like a federal government, what is their purpose?
The sword, primarily. I'm going to just hit it really. I'm going to go to Romans 13, and I'm going to go to the Old Testament civil law, and I'm going to go to Genesis chapter 9, verse 6. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. Romans 13, right? The government, or particularly my servant, right? The word Paul uses is diakonon, so it's a servant of God, right? He's under the hierarchy of the King of Kings first and foremost, and his role is as the referee. His role is to instantiate the rules, and whose rules are they? God's. So as a Christian, my belief thoroughly would be, whether you want to say natural law or biblical law, I always find that distinction a little bit silly, philosophically speaking, as if God has two moral codes, right? He's one being with one moral nature, and his law is the same all times and all places. Special revealed law simply does just that. It reveals what natural law already has contained in the hearts of man, in our conscience, right? So we know the law, and the government is required to uphold that law, right? So that's going to look in practice like a military, like a police force, right? Like an internal security, like a judiciary, a system of courts, right? That can definitely bleed over into some infrastructure that's necessary. I've often thought the principle of, right, if the role of the state is to maintain justice, well, then you can abstract from that, and there's certain things you could get, certain infrastructure projects, right? Potentially even at times having to look at certain fiduciary arrangements and certain types of money and to see, is this theft, right? Is this person stealing from this person over here, right? But it's a very different thing from them getting involved in the game and trying to create wealth. I don't know what y'all think about this, but as far as I understand, reading both scripture, I know I just betrayed that I'm a Canadian who's down in the south with the y'all. I got Texan in me a lot now. When I read scripture and also just history, I see pretty clearly that the government doesn't create any wealth. That wasn't the role of the king. That wasn't the role of the magistrate. The government, by definition, appropriates wealth in order to ensure certain things are done in a state that God, I believe, has given him the prerogative to do. But that's very different from coming in and saying, okay, because again, if the government creates wealth, I mean, how are they creating it? The only way they're creating anything is by taking from somebody else, right? And that is legalized theft. I always go to 1 Samuel chapter 8. Maybe you know where I'm already going. I'm sure if it's ever come up in conversations. 1 Samuel chapter 8, when the Israelites want a king, and Samuel's like, really? God says, no, give it to them. Let them have what the world has. When I'm teaching my students, I always remind them, Israel was holy and set apart in every way. And one of those ways was that Israel was a republic, probably the first one ever in history. There was a dispersion of powers. Wealth was concentrated in the hand of who? The tribes, the families, right? And the people produced the wealth. You have the Levitical system there to ensure a measure of justice and welfare and education, right? Much like the priesthood. And then you have the magistrate, the king, set up, and he's not allowed to tamper with these other areas of life. Think of when Hezekiah goes in to offer incense, right? He's given leprosy, he's pronounced death, right? The king is not supposed to be given this. And so when Israel, many years before that, decades, centuries, asked for a king, God says, okay, I'll give you one. And this is what's going to happen. You're young, your money, your wealth, right? It's just essentially says you will become slaves to this king, and all the best of what you have will be owned by them. Tell me functionally that today in the West we're not much different. I mean, in terms of what we actually own, how much we're taxed. Do you own your house? Really? No. You're renting it. From who? From the crown, right? You pay income tax. That's rent. Right? So the current system, as we've said it, I mean, again, this is different from 200 years ago, right? We're living in a welfare state today, something that's really opposed to the biblical Christian idea that was historically given to us by our predecessors. But as we've apostatized, we've abandoned that. So I think the actual magistrate's role is not to control first of all, they can't create wealth by definition, but certainly not to control all the means of production and the means of fiduciary creation and fiduciary arrangements. Rather, they're to ensure that people can raise their goats and raise their chickens, and that they can do that exchange without interfering on each other's liberties. I'm curious what you maybe think of that.
Brent, I'll let you go
Well,
first.
it just seems so easy to, Josh, it just seems so easy to let the government take care of it. And it's their responsibility. And because if you put that on, no, I fully agree with you. I'm just trying to play this out a little bit. But if you put this on the people as individuals, like, what are you going to get, right? I don't know. Maybe 200 years ago, like you said, things were different and people had more resourcefulness. They know how to handle responsibility. But what do you think of our current culture now? Like, can we go back to that sense where, look, I take control of my life, I take control of my family, I take ownership of it, I take responsibility for it?
Yeah, I'm homesteading. I have cows and chickens, and I know there's a lot of men I respect who could do it. Maybe, right? When I look at Mark's beard, I'm just inclined to think that Mark's got that down.
Mark's got it.
I would probably say, like, I saw somebody today say something about the Canadian situation and just deploring, no, we don't want the globalists. Canadians don't want that. I think Canadians do want it, by and large. I think it's really sad. I think it's regrettable and tragic, but I do think that at least the Canadian culture in particular, and broader Western civilization, is so comfortable, so complacent, so greedy. Life is so easy. I mean, when I'm in Nigeria and there's no water, there's no light for weeks, or all the amenities of, first world living are gone. I've accustomed myself to that. But when I come back here, the first thing that happens every time, within like 2 weeks, I add 10 pounds, 15 pounds every time. And it's not necessarily because I'm eating substantially more. It just reminds me that, this is a fake world. Everything over here is, it's like trash world. It's all just kind of make believe. And we're in it. We're inundated with it. Whether it's the news, whether it's the films, whether it's social media, whether it's our schools, government, whatever. But it's so easy, right? I come over here within 2 weeks, everything's at my fingertips. I almost like a kid at Christmas. I'm like, oh yeah, no, I need that because I'm not going to get that when I'm over there. And then all of a sudden I'm like, wait, what happened here? That was fast. So I think you're onto something there, Brent. It's going to take time. I'm a believer that what we need is not revival. We need reformation. And it's not that revival is not a part of reformation, but reformation is a lot more difficult, and it will bring more trials upon us than just, okay, I've been born again.
Well, okay, what do you mean by that? Like, just dig into that a little bit, because Mark and I have talked about this fake world idea that you brought up. Like, everything seems like, we've pushed off reality. We're not actually dealing with the truth. Like, when we're spending money that's fiat money that's printed into existence by the powers that be, that didn't come at a cost. It didn't cost them anything to make that value. And yet it's displayed to the people in the country as if it is value, right? It's like, here's value. This represents value. Why don't you go exchange it with each other? And that's not reality. So you have this like fake world you're living in, and reality is behind the scenes. So what do you mean when you say like reformation versus revival, and where can we go from one?
I mean, because when you just mentioned that, I had in my head the image of, I remember in Nigeria, it wasn't long ago, there was a massive stimulus bill. We're talking hundreds of billions of naira, which in our currency is hundreds of millions of dollars probably. And
were you one of the first recipients of it, or?
I tried. I'm like, well, I'm going to be a hypocrite and abandon all my principles.
Get your wheelbarrow out.
Right? Why not? Right? But it's no value. And I just remember seeing the look on everyone's. All these guys I'd even been teaching, and they were so excited. I stopped and I almost wanted to smack them all. I said, you realize this is going to make all of your lives worse. You are not benefiting from this. A small group in the government class will benefit from this. It's the same in Canada. Every time we see a new bill passed with hundreds, Carney or Trudeau passing these massive spending bills, what it's doing to your savings, your livelihood and such. So anyways, how do we get out of that, right? I mean, and unequivocally, I would say a couple of things. And the first answer is simple enough, right? We know that the true answer is the gospel. But when I say the gospel, I mean the entirety of Scripture, not just parts of it. And what I've grown up in, and you would have both have done this as well, born and raised in Canada, I found that by and large, and I'll focus on Canada for a moment, I think, but I think it, by extension, does apply to the rest of the Western world. In our docility and impotency, we, especially as men, have lost the virility of what it means to be men. And particularly, we have no longer led as we're called to lead. Now, it's not just us. I'm not putting the blame on our generation. It's been a couple 150 years. We've grown and developed in a feminist matriarchy. Okay, so everything's the reverse of what it's supposed to be, completely the reverse. And I know people get upset with this, but I don't care anymore. Right? I cared a lot more when I was younger. Now it's just like, this is ridiculous because our culture is eroding. It's dead. Like you right? It's fake. The food is fake. The medicine is fake. The films are fake. Right? The money's fake. Everything's just not real. It's a dystopia already. How do we get out of it? The unadulterated gospel presents a message of a king and a kingdom. And too many fathers, too many men, and too many pastors in the pulpit, I'll say it, they're cowards. They're just cowards. They are scared of what might happen to their tax break for their church. They are scared that they might have to have some hard conversations with some people who are still asleep and still just want to continue well, we were born into this, right? Our grandparents or our parents grew up and this will always be here, right? The historical anomaly that is Western civilization, as if living with these kind of luxuries and comforts is just going to continue on forever. Like, give me a break. No, it's totally, the rest of the world does not live like this at all. And how do you get out of that? Well, you need some bold men who are really willing to stand up to begin with and decry these falsities. You need it in the home, right? So you need men who are willing to raise their children. I mean, I'll put it like this. Men who are willing to have families, have lots of kids, disciple those kids thoroughly. I go back to what my father did with me when I was a kid, and I actually tell, right? Yeah, have your kids memorize the confessions, the creeds at a young age, right? School them in the home, right? Maybe there's a private Christian school you trust, but even then, at times, I'm like, leery sometimes, right? School them in the home. As we do that, I have conversations with our American counterparts all the time. Ever since COVID, right? I can't remember the numbers, but homeschooling in the States went from like 1 to 2 million to like 10 million children, 12? It's unbelievable. What happens when those children who are all homeschooled, discipled in a pretty classical education? I mean, they know logic, they know rhetoric. I'm sitting there with kids who are 16 years old, and I'm like, oh, goodness, I can talk to you about Plato. Can't talk to your parents, though. Right? They know where the capital of Canada is, but your parents have no idea. Right? But what happens when those children enter the higher institutions? What happens when that massive number of well-discipled, homeschooled, classically trained children now become adults? We're kind of seeing it. I think I already hear that the numbers in Canada, that those under 30 are overwhelmingly conservative. And it might not be a very discipled Christian, but that says something already. So I think it begins there. It begins with fathers. It begins with the families, the kind of discipleship where you regain reading in the home. You read with your children. You create readers and thinkers. And then those kind of fathers, they're out also in the public eye. And they're fighting those battles. I mean, that means fathers and men and getting involved in library boards and school boards, right? And it means getting involved in town hall and municipality and local politics. Not just the one, Dave Bilsma, right? I always go to his name because he's over there in West Lincoln and I know him well, right? But you need a cohort around him, right? And then you slowly like that. And men who have that unadulterated view of Christ is king, there is no other Lord. We desire to be ruled by godly laws, and we want our nation to be a God-fearing nation. So we're not going to go up to the top and just nail down some laws, but we're going to, from the bottom up, create a society. We're going to reform it from the bottom through the families. And I do put the primary bulk of the responsibility here on us as the men. I know there's actually no shortage of women stepping up these days. I think you see it everywhere. That still concerns me quite a bit. It's not to say these women are sinning by doing that, but I still always ask the biblical question, the one that Deborah, asked Barak in the book of where are the men? Where's Dan? Why do I have to do this? She's smacking Barak around kind of. You have to read that. I always hear people say, well, Deborah was a civil magistrate. Yeah, Israel was under a curse. They're told that they're being judged, and she's smacking him around like, why do I have to do this? Right? So families, fathers, and then slowly through those levels, self-government, and then, family government, church government. We need men who are bold in the pulpit. We need men who are not scared about the protesters coming in. There's a theologian I admire quite a bit. He often says that one of the greatest weaknesses of the modern church is in their willingness to apply it to everyday life. They might say an application like, be patient with your wife and respect your husband, but applying it means, can you start breaking it down and giving examples in the cultural setting? Most pastors don't do it because it starts to get offensive to people. That's the whole point. And we need pastors willing to do that again. So I know I kind of went around, but hopefully that Reformation happens from the ground up, but it's going to require men being pretty bold and getting back to their traditional virtues.
Yeah, I mean, you're speaking my language. We've talked quite a bit about, the feminization of North American society and, safety at all costs and what that's done to us and what it's done to the church as well. I just want to pick up a little bit on the government side of things, because I happen to think that the government exists to protect property rights, and so that engenders a military, a police, and whatever goes along with property rights. And so just on the topic of I guess Christian nationalism, because this is a thing that's
these days.
It's the boogeyman, right? And I'm actually not in favor necessarily of Christian nationalism, but I think it goes a little bit along the lines of what you said, that if we want a nation that's governed by Christian laws and rules, that's fine, but it has to come from the bottom up. From what you're talking about, men need to step up primarily and lead their families and do that along with their wives, but it's the responsibility of men to do that. And then create a society, like it's the example of abortion in Canada, right? We can send Christians to Parliament and we can try to pass private members' bills. It's going to be ineffective if the vast majority of Canadians support abortion. You will never get anywhere until actually Canadians say, we don't support abortion. We need a change, right? And it has to come from the bottom. So number one, I guess, Christian nationalism. What do you think? And and a little more vague, like, what is your preferred style of government? Because I'm pretty done with democracy and where it's led us, right?
I know. Isn't it funny when you're growing up and you're younger, and the whole attack probably from one side is always fascist and this and that and the other. And you get to a point where you're like, I kind of want a king. If he's noble and just and virtuous, right? Because this rule of the mob. And here's the thing. I like that question because Calvin wrote about this, actually. And I really enjoyed at the end of his Institutes, where he kind of dissects the three forms of government and ultimately just says, look, not one of them is necessarily biblical as opposed to the others. You could have a just monarchy, you can have a just republic, and you can have a just aristocracy, right? Or you could have those three forms, and each one of them can work well in their own right. What is the convention of the culture in their history? But of course, each one of those forms can also digress into something horrid, right? Monarchy becomes dictatorship, right? Aristocracy becomes oligarchy, and republic becomes democracy, actually, right? And we're living and I say this I would agree with you, Mark. I don't like democracy. I mean, I actually don't on principle. It's not just what I've seen it do. I would be a Republican, principally speaking, right?
Yeah.
When people hear this, don't just think American GOP, right? No, principled republicanism is what I would generally subscribe to. But if that meant I had a monarch who was honest, just, and virtuous, I know my American compatriots and I always go back and forth on this because they don't care. They don't want a king, right? They're at the end of this discussion. And I'm like, look,
no kings.
In many ways, I'm with you. No kings. Other side, if I had, I'm like, we've got a king, actually, right? I've got a monarch right now. He's just, he's virtuous, he's good, he's eternal. I have no problem submitting to him. So if there was a king, in fact, that was, modeling him, I wouldn't have a problem submitting to him. I wouldn't have a problem submitting to a true godly aristocracy like you had at points in Europe in the past, right? So on that topic then of Christian nationalist, and to me it always depends what a person means, right? Because it's such a hot topic, the definition of the term. Because there's forms of Christian nationalist I hear and I'm like, well, that 100% no, I wouldn't agree with that. There's other forms of it I'm 100% all on board. Right. And to me, I just always go back, and there's a few passages, but probably the most famous, right, is the Great Commission, disciple all the nations. And the way I understand it and seeing it play out in history is that, really simply, if we as Christians do the work of Christians, it slowly develops. I don't have to force it. I don't have to get something from the top down, right? There's times where the government might have to step in if the majority indeed is Christian. Okay, that happens throughout all history, right? But generally speaking, I just think I'm going to do the work, and as I disciple those around me, right, and they're transformed by the grace of God, and they do that in their families, slowly but surely families are transformed, and then communities, and I see it more of as a logical and spiritual progression that the nations, and this has to do maybe a bit with eschatology too, right, that the nations are slowly moving in that direction, and that indeed that's what I want, that's what I would profess to be, right? I would have no problem saying that I want my nation to honor Christ, to subscribe to the laws of God. I want godly leaders. I think any Christian wants that. It's a matter of how you're willing to get it. And it seems to me most of the disagreement often on that term is on how people want to get it. And I would say I want to get it the way that all Christians have historically gotten it when they had it. It was really through little other means than that the gospel was preached faithfully in the home, in the surrounding culture, and it just spread to the point where the majority of the people in England at points in time, or America, or Canada at points in times, were Christian, whether Methodist, Baptist, Presbyterian, whatever. They had that as their commonality, and they said, and then naturally the people in Parliament, the people in the Senate, right, they're just a reflection of that. I'm in favor of that. Absolutely. I would never shy away from that. I'm not like the Anabaptist missionary I heard about. This is always a fun story to me, who he was so opposed to Christians involved in politics and anything like that. Have you heard this one? I don't think so. This was somewhere in the South.
It's not a dad joke, is it? Mark likes
No, it's not.
If it's a dad joke, Brent's heard them all from me.
Yeah, I've heard it. It wasn't Anabaptist at one time. Well, yeah.
I know that one, yeah. No, it was this Anabaptist missionary who was working with a tribe of untouched people and ministering to them. And guess what happened? They converted. And guess who converted too? Their tribal had converted. But their theology didn't allow for it. So the Anabaptist missionary sent out to the surrounding islands, hey, we need a pagan ruler to come and replace the chief here who's become a Christian. We can't have that. So a pagan ruler was brought from a different island. Guess what happened to him?
Became a Christian.
He became a Christian. So this internal paradox in the Anabaptist theology, it's like, what do we do when we convert them? Well, we've converted them. And if they want to
structurally set up to get more unconverted people and convert them. It's a good machine.
Yeah, who would have thought? Right. So when it comes to that, I'm not a top-down type of person. Never have been. I just want us to do the work, and I believe that when we do it, that's what happens, and that's what I want to have happen. Right.
Okay, so I have a question about Islam, and because you've talked about sort of the progression in the West, I'm like, there's another progression in the West I can think of. But before, because we should wrap up soonish probably. But Brent, do you got anything you need to get in there before
I got a long list of questions. We're gonna have Joshua back on.
We're gonna have to
do it again. This is fun, guys. This is good.
Well, so not to sideline the woman in our audience here, but like if you could talk to men and like what things can men
Brent,
grow
there's
in?
no women in our audience. Come on. Other than your grandmother and your wife. Not even my wife listens.
I try to, maybe that's something you got to give advice. So just what would you say we need to grow in or reform in, like leadership, apologetics, stewardship? Like where do we need to be in 10 years?
The mind, the life of the mind. So much. I mean, I know a lot of men still, they're physically agile, right? They're still physically virile, right? We've got a whole culture of that now, kind of getting men back to, being strong and fit. And I know a lot of guys who have no problems doing that, but to be strong and fit is actually relatively easy compared to this being strong and fit. And I know a lot of men who are almost using it. I don't want to say they're using it as a cop-out. I shouldn't say that. But it's kind of almost the crutch. Well, I've got my body in shape, right? And I have kids, so I'm good. I'm providing for them. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. Well, there's one area I notice with my work with men in this continent, in that continent. This is universal. It's ubiquitous. It's the life of the mind. getting men to think. I know you've got viewers, like you said, mostly men. I encourage the men I work with all the time, guys, read, right? The battle of our world is a battle of ideas. It is first and foremost going to be won here, not necessarily on the battlefield with arms. That might be a time and a place, but for us to reform it this way and for men to regain their position, I mean, the statistics are clear. Not only are women predominantly getting far more higher education degrees now, women are far more literate. Women are far more engaged in what Solomon would call the city gates, which was the prerogative of men in biblical history, right? And the way men can re-engage that is simple. They have to read. When I teach men all the time, I ask a simple question when I'm often, even in churches where it's a mixed audience, I like to ask, okay, how many of the women here read, right? And then how many women, like how many books do you finish a year? And then I ask the men the same question, and I'll normally see almost every woman's hand go up, maybe one or two. With the men, it's the reverse. I'll see one or two men's hands go up. They read a book, and they might get through one or two books a year. They simply don't read. Now, men are re-engaging a little bit more in this age through podcasts. They're listening a lot, which, hallelujah, that's a great step. But as I want to remind our brothers, God did not come through the television or through the audiobook. He came through the written word. And you are an image bearer of the word. When I describe the Trinity to people, I always use the thinking thought analogy. You are a reflection of the Trinity. You are 3 in 1. We are sitting here right now having conversations with ourselves, right? Father and Son speaking. What is that but not an image of the Trinity? You are ideas processing, because God in his essence is the word. He is thought. He is, and this we'll get into logic maybe another time, right? But men need to reclaim some sovereignty over the realm of ideas, and Christian men in particular, especially because we are inheritors of the tradition of the word. The pagans weren't. The pagans didn't develop education, literacy. The pagans didn't write the great historical works of literature. The pagans didn't develop this civilizational, I mean, it's incredible, right? We're living on the borrowed capital of our Christian forebears who were thinkers through and through. I'll end it with this as an example. 200 years ago, if you were to enter colonial America and you were to go into the public square, right? And what would you find men talking about? You'd find them discussing politics, theology, philosophy. Yeah, they're farming, but it's mixed in with how to run their life, family, education, that. If you go to the public square now, okay, the pub, something like that, what are men talking about? Sports?
Yeah.
And nothing, right? Yeah. They might be talking about their kids only, and I'm not saying it's wrong to talk about your kids, but I do think that reflects the feminization of men when they can't speak about those ideas anymore. And if you can't think them, you can't speak about them, I mean, you're not going to be a leader. There's no way we're going to reclaim anything. There's no way we're going to be able to develop a generation under us who is able to defend themselves, right? So men need to regain the life of the mind. They've got to read philosophy. They've got to read politics. They've got to read economic theory. They need to read theology. And then they need to get out, stop being lazy, and get into groups and discuss it with other men and say, okay, guys, now what are we going to do with this? How are we going to have an impact for our children here in our area or something like that?
Interesting. So, yeah, I just thank you for mentioning the written word, because it's a bit of a hobby horse of mine.
As we sit
in
front of books on a podcast.
Yeah.
We got the screen.
Those are for show.
I'm just selling them.
I got them at a garage sale. No, but so just as an example, you've got the show The Chosen, which a lot of people are like, oh, that's such a great teaching tool for. I'm like, we have a teaching tool. It's called the Bible. Yeah. You don't need. And if God wanted to come now, he would have sent Jesus now in the age of TikTok and Instagram, and we would have, but no, he came with the written word only. And that should be a clue. I agree. Christian men have to be readers. Now, what do you say though to a man who's just not I'm just not really I'm not academically inclined. I'm good with a hammer. And it reminds me, you talked about, teach a man the fish analogy, right? Give a man a fish he eats for a day, teach a man to fish, you'll never see him every weekend. Um, maybe.
Very true. Yeah, that's another problem with men today. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Men need to fish more. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I got myself off track. No, but with sort of the feminization of society, men don't engage in traditional masculine activities, but that doesn't necessarily include reading. So I guess we're going to have to leave my Islam thread for later. But what do you say to men who are just like, I ain't that smart. Yeah. I put myself in that category. I make myself read. But what do you say to them?
Number one, you're far smarter than you think, because you can do things with your hands that 99% of other people can't, or 98. Right. So I never believe when men say, I mean, I know God has given, he's apportioned talents differently, but I never buy that I'm just not smart. I'm like, no, you just haven't developed it. Right. It's a muscle. Right. I'm not that good with my hands, but when I practice and I work on it, it comes. Right. So it's always doable. Now I recognize too that there are obviously still different aptitudes and all of that, but our God is a merciful God, and he understands what he's apportioned to each man. And we're required to develop with what we have. And every man's been given a mind, and every man's been made an image bearer, and every man has been called to read the word and to follow the word. And so when the exact question I've been asked a few times, I don't like reading. I can't do it. Pardon me. I just don't like doing it. I can't do it. So what about me? I say, well, unless you start now, you're not going to enjoy heaven as much as me. And the reason I actually say that is because God is an eternal being who's omniscient. What do you think you're going to be doing in the new earth? I mean, we know that we're going to continue to do all good things God has made, right? We're told if we follow the scriptural idea clearly, we're going to be resting, we're going to be working, we're going to be eternally discovering and knowing God deeper, and it will never stop. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to get to talk to him. But as some theologians have worked out really beautifully, sometimes in works of fiction, other times just in straight theology, you're going to sit with John Calvin or Martin Luther or Paul or Aquinas, or you're going to talk to them. You're going to ask them. You are going to spend eternity learning and knowing God deeper in order to enjoy him more. So when somebody dies and they're a creature of hell, and have you ever sat in front of a funeral service and they're trying to preach a message of like, well, he was a good man? It's like, no, he's a creature of hell. Let's preach an honest sermon here, because if that man were to show up at the pearly gates, okay, if he was to be there, he would feel totally uncomfortable. He would want nothing to do with creatures of heaven because of who he is, how he's designed himself and habituated himself on this side of eternity. He's a creature of hell. He'll hate it. He'll be miserable for eternity, but he belongs in what he's made for himself. And it's similar for Christians, right? We are, of course, what God's made us, and what we habituate in ourselves will also in a large way determine how well we can enjoy the new eternity. Not like there's going to be envy or jealousy or anything, right? But do you anticipate, do any of us anticipate? I mean, the Bible's pretty clear. There's still hierarchy there. God is still the king. I'm not going to be sitting on a Paul's throne. I'm not going to have none of us are going to have claim to be Paul or Peter, to be chosen as a prophet or an apostle or something, right? There is this hierarchy still there. And how we actually can enjoy that, or how much we can enjoy the new earth, is largely dependent on how we live here. Of course, we're saved by grace, but our works do follow with us. 1 Corinthians chapter 3 talks about two different types of people who are saved. Those who are saved and their works are burnt up, those who are saved and their works follow them. And so I always encourage people, look, do your faithful deeds here, but read and come to understand the God you worship and the God you love in every area of his being, the scientific side of him, the political side of him, the theological, of course, his own essence, right? Philosophical, poetic, the fictional, right? The literary, the love for beauty. Study it all, because as you do that, not only does it make you much more effective here, but it will give you a foundation which makes the new world far more enjoyable when you get there, and you won't be behind. I actually do believe, and this may be a different conversation, but people who refuse to study, who refuse to read, who just, I'm saved, once saved, always saved kind of thing, and that's it, I'm good, I don't want to do anything else. Maybe they will indeed be saved, but a lot of them, I think their works will be burnt up, and it's not that they're not going to enjoy it, but they're going to be way behind. I always like to say to my students, get your head start now, because the life you're living now is preparation for eternity. So develop the mind now.
Yeah, almost just thinking about leadership and how leadership is in many ways you're inspiring people, right? To change, to follow, and in order to kind of move people in that way. And you have a good way of doing this, so appreciate you coming on. But you have to speak with conviction, right? And that conviction comes from what you believe, right? That's what conviction is. So, and how do you know what you believe if you don't read and don't study and don't think and don't grapple with these things? And like you said, little groups of people talking together, hashing these things out. Like maybe it's your apologetics training when you were 6 years old and all of this running you through the ringer, but you can tell when someone speaks with conviction that they've read the ideas, they understand it, and you can tell right away. I think human beings are like, I'm not going to follow that guy. He's not a leader. And that's what it is you don't know the ideas that you're talking about. And the only way to get there is to read, and it takes a long time.
That's a great point, Brent. Like, think about what would happen if we actually had a lot more men publicly in Canada, Christian men, because they're familiar with the ideas and they're familiar with the enemy's ideas, that they can come up and speak with confidence and conviction. I just don't see that often, even from the pulpit sometimes. I might see confidence on the gospel, right? But once it starts getting into some of the cultural issues, I just see so many pastors not only kind of shy away, but they say something kind of that's a bad word to use for it. They say something squeamishly, right? They're getting it out, but they're really retracting really quick. No, speak it authoritatively, and if you've got to deal with it later, deal with it later sometimes. But I think it would do tremendous, substantial change.
Oh man!
Wow. Okay, I think it's probably a good spot to wrap it up for this one. I think Joshua, we're gonna have to further this conversation.
Sure.
A lot of threads left untouched, but
we got to talk some Islam too, right?
Oh, that's one episode. One episode for sure. So if people want to support your work, I guess where could they go?
Sure. So if you're in Canada, just go to the Great Commission Foundation. And maybe if you guys have, I can give you the information. You can put it at the bottom. Just the ministry name, Jungle Ministry, and the number. But Great Commission Foundation, if you're in the States, teach the story, Jungle Ministry. You will see me there. I'll give you guys that information. But you can follow the work there. You can feel free to reach out to me. We have a podcast and all of that stuff, but I'll give you the info because it's too much to probably list.
Yeah,
we'll drop it in the show notes for sure.
There we go.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Joshua, for coming on. We appreciate your time, and wish you Lord's blessing in your work as you continue to foster leadership and just spread the gospel. So, for the folks listening, thanks very much. I encourage you to look up Joshua as well, follow his podcast, and until next time,
steward your wealth wisely. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Two Stewards Show. If you like my voice better, click subscribe.
If you like my voice better, click share.
If you like both, give us a 5-star rating.
To learn more about the show, head on over to twostewards.ca and explore our free resources. To interact with the show, feel free to reach out at hello@twostewards.ca.
We will see you in the next episode. In the meantime, steward your wealth wisely.
Nailed it.